Barbara, on my lap is the most extraordinary book of illustrations from 1917, still well preserved. And inside the cover it says Sergeant Jim Maultsaid, 14th Royal Irish Rifles. And that was your grandfather?
He was, yes.
So when did you first become aware of this extraordinary legacy of illustrations and diaries?
Well, the diaries, I remember them as a child. I first saw them probably when I was about 8 or 9. I always remember reading a bit about when he was going to war, he was terrified of being blinded. And as a child, I sort of read this and I felt very, very emotional even then.
I mean, I'm looking at one page here about the Battle of the Somme, you know, and men in uniform lying in the mud and the smoke. Whatever pressure you might be under in the trenches, to write a few words, but to illustrate as incredibly as he does. And the illustrations are magnificent.
But I mean, he always carried the sketchbook, and apparently any opportunity he had, he sat down and sketched, because he often talks about it in the book, in the diary. He was wounded at the Battle of the Somme. He was shot through his right shoulder, so he did suffer quite a lot all his life with ill health. Yeah. But I think doing the diaries, I do think helped him. You know, to sit down and write the diaries and to spend his time doing that. He always wanted to be like a cartoon artist. He said if he had it, that's what he would love to have been. That would have been his choice of career, yeah, a cartoon artist.
When did you first become aware of Jim Maultsaid?
Well, obviously being my grandfather, and luckily I knew him till he died in 1971, so I was 17 at that time. So very strong, lovely memories of my grandfather.
Because it was often the case, because of the horrors of war, you know, families will often say, oh, Dad or Granddad didn't say anything about the war. What was the experience with him?
Yes, that was true of my grandfather. He would talk about his early days here in Donegal, talked very fondly about them, but actual stories about the war I don't recall him telling.
The notion of any poet or any writer, you know, as shells fly over them, you know, being able to compress their thoughts into a diary or whatever, it's extraordinary, isn't it?
It is. It just takes a particular way of thinking and interpretation, because the stories are so lucid and so detailed. He must have had a fantastic grasp of what was going on, and obviously the wherewithal to make the notes to then be able to produce the narrative in the diaries.
Richard, who exactly was Sergeant Jim Maultsaid?
Well, Jim was an American citizen born in Pennsylvania in 1893 of Irish parents who decided to return to Ireland when Jim was a child. They came back to Donegal and to Letterkenny. Jim later, as a young man, went to Belfast in search of work. He was in Belfast when the First World War broke out, and he fell in with some friends who were in the Young Citizen Volunteers, and with them enlisted in the YCV, and in that way became part and parcel of the 14th Battalion of the Royal Irish Rifles.
And what was his experience at the Somme, Richard?
His experience at the Somme was relatively short. Jim gives us a very, very clear account of what it was like throughout what's most of the morning and probably into the early afternoon, and then he is hit and badly wounded in the left arm. It's a wound from which he actually never recovers. He's never fit enough again to be a frontline infantryman. But in that description of those hours is one of the finest accounts and one of the clearest accounts I have ever read of what it was like to be an infantryman on the Western Front.
How do you rate Sergeant Jim Maultsaid's contribution to our store of knowledge about the First World War?
It's one of the best that we have, and that's not just talking about here in Ireland, it's right across the British Isles. There are very, very few who have left accounts who have done it quite as well as Jim Maultsaid, and I include among those the public school boys who left a poetic record. Jim Maultsaid exceeds them. If anybody takes the time and trouble to read them, it really is one of the finest accounts of the First World War.